Alright guys, Murph's here. And today we are going to talk about the 3030 Winchester cartridge. Also known as the 3030 Winchester centerfire, 30 WCF. Now we're going to discuss some history, do a little bit of cartridge comparison, talk about some pros and cons, and then also kind of talk about some methodology use and all that kind of stuff. So, in 1886, the French unveiled smokeless powder, and this caused an arms race of a major magnitude across all the militaries of the world because, as it turns out, smokeless powder was a massive technological advancement in cartridge design. Previously, cartridges had been based around black powder, which required greater volume in order to be able to generate greater pressures and greater velocities, and then also wound up needing to be used with larger bullets. Now, when we talk about larger bullets, we're talking about things in the 40 to 50 caliber range. And when we talk about lower velocities, we're talking about 1,300 to about 1,600 feet per second. It's fairly anemic. Now, smokeless powder comes along, and the goal of 2,000 feet per second out of a rifle suddenly becomes not only a reality, but easily obtainable with this new powder, this new propellant to be used in ammunition. So next thing you know, we start... Pretty much all the militaries now are able to move over to smaller caliber projectiles, propel them at higher overall velocities, and get greater overall range out of them with less fouling. Now let's kind of talk about each one of these aspects individually. Now, smaller caliber. Again, today, we're coming off of 40 to 50 caliber, right? So today when I say smaller caliber, you might think 22 caliber type projectiles or something along that line. But at this time, we're talking about 30 caliber projectiles because obviously that's smaller than 40. Or 45. So now 30 caliber projectiles can become the norm. They're moving in excess of 2,000 feet per second with a bullet that weighs half as much in grains, and are also leaving behind less particulate matter in the barrel so that you keep it cleaner and maintain your accuracy longer. That's pretty good overall, especially when you start talking about the velocity aspect. Now, the negative that comes with smokeless powder is that it generates a lot more pressure, which means that you need specifically designed barrels and locking lugs to be able to withstand those pressures. Not a big deal. A lot of militaries are already reevaluating their firearms during this time, wanting to move over to magazine-fed systems. Now, it would take a little while for this technology to make it over to the civilian sector, but make it over it would. And in 1895, Winchester would unveil the 3030 Winchester centerfire cartridge for their model 1894 lever-action rifle. Now, this cartridge was a 30 caliber projectile, round nose in design, seated into a necked and rimmed cartridge casing, generating velocities of just under 2,000 feet per second with a 160 grain projectile. Now, it's kind of interesting, and I want to kind of pick apart a couple of things about this cartridge right off the bat. First off, let's do a really quick size comparison. So, on the left, we have 7.62 by 3.9. In the center, we have 3030 Winchester, and on the right, we have 30-06 Springfield. Now, the naming convention for this cartridge actually stems from the same naming convention that was used for black powder cartridges, which is to say that 30, the first part of the number that we're using here, is the diameter of the projectile, and the second 30 is the number of grains of powder in the cartridge casing. Now, like I said, the goal was 2,000 feet per second. Why are we getting excited over a just under 2,000 foot per second cartridge? Well, first off, it's the first smokeless powder cartridge to make it on the civilian market. So the civilians haven't had a chance to really enjoy 2,000 feet per second ballistics yet. And then second off, we are talking about a rather mildly recoiling cartridge which can be chambered in lighter overall hunting rifles, which makes it much more accessible and a better overall option for the civilian hunting market. That's what this cartridge is actually built for. It's not meant to be a military cartridge. It's meant to be a hunting cartridge, and something that you would actually want to hunt with, as opposed to 30-06 or something else in a light platform, which is going to beat you up pretty heavily with recoil. Now you can kind of see where the advantages come from. Now, unfortunately, those advantages would also quickly switch over to being some of the issues with the 3030 Winchester. Now, other manufacturers would also introduce rifles chambered in the 3030 Winchester. Marlin and Savage would introduce offerings fairly quickly. However, they would drop Winchester centerfire from the cartridge designation and just refer to it as 3030 smokeless or 30-30 centerfire. They did not want to give Winchester the credit for the cartridge. Older 1894 Winchester 94s will be marked 30 WCF on the barrel. So that'll kind of, if you ever run across one and you see that marking on there, that's what that means, and that gives you an idea how old the rifle is. Now, the issue with 30-30 Winchester comes down to the bullet shape, which it is pretty much always round or flat-nosed projectiles. Why is that? Well, it comes down to what the rifle is most popular, or what the cartridge, I guess I should say, is most popularly used with, and that is tubular magazine lever action rifles. And this rifle did not necessarily get to benefit, or this cartridge, I keep saying rifle, this cartridge did not necessarily get to benefit from the advancement of Spitzer or pointed type ammunition. Why is that? Well, originally all of these smokeless powder cartridges that are coming out at this time were round nose, very large grain projectiles. When Spitzer type ammunition was introduced, which went to a lighter projectile with a more aerodynamic tip, the velocity shot up to near 3,000 feet per second. And only since then the velocities have gone up. Well, an issue was very quickly found because quite a few militaries were still trying to properly adapt magazine feed to their single-shot rifles, and many of them were looking at tubular magazines. And the issue you run into with Spitzer-type ammunition in a tubular magazine is the risk of chain detonation. Now, what is that? Well, when you load ammunition into a tubular magazine, you have the tip of the bullet pressing against the butt of the round in front of it, where the primer is located. So you potentially have a pointy bullet resting against the primer of live ammunition. Now, these things are under spring tension, so they're pressed together very tightly. And then you add the shock of recoil, you potentially improvise a firing pin out of the bullet behind the next one in the magazine tube, which can cause a chain detonation. There's two issues with that. One, magazine tubes are not designed to withstand those pressures. And two, your hand is probably gripping where the magazine tube's at. There's a high probability for injury. Now, there's some debate as to how big of an issue this is with rimmed cartridge casings, if there's not perhaps a little bit more offset in how the rims seat inside of the magazine tube. However, something that I would point out is during this time period, this early developmental stage, Russia and France were utilizing or trying to utilize tubular magazine designs. And the Russians would wind up dropping tubular magazine feed altogether because of the risk or very real possibility of chain detonation. The French would alter the design of their 8mm Lebel cartridge to add a ridge that went around the primer so as to keep the bullets from, the tips of the bullets from being able to easily rest against that primer. Obviously, it worked out pretty good for the French because they fought with it all throughout World War I and didn't seem to have too many issues with it. But another thing to kind of take into account whenever we talk about probability and possible outcomes of probability is that most people seem to think about it as like a one-time application, which actually you have to reassess the probability of chain detonation with Spitzer-type ammunition in a tubular magazine every time you pull the trigger. As long as there's 2 rounds in the magazine tube, you reevaluate your relationship with probability after each shot. All right, so it's not to say that there were not magazine-fed systems eventually made for the 30-30 Winchester. Savage utilized a rotary magazine for their Savage Model 99. There was a bolt-action rifle produced for the 30-30 Winchester that used the box magazine. And even today, Magnum Research offers the 30-30 Winchester in their BFR line of revolvers. So you could totally load Spitzer-type ammunition into the 30-30 Winchester. However, you're not really going to find Spitzer-type 30-30 Winchester on any shelves because the vast majority of rifles chambered for the 30-30 Winchester are a tubular magazine, and manufacturers don't want to deal with the liability or even the possibility of liability when it comes to somebody putting the wrong ammunition in the wrong gun. Now, that was up until about 15 years ago when Hornady came out with their Lever Evolution line of ammunition. Now, the Lever Evolution took Hornady's FTX type tip that they use in their Hornady critical defense ammunition and reshaped it into a Spitzer type protrusion coming off the top of the bullet, which gave the 30-30 Winchester cartridge, or I guess bullet design, a more aerodynamic type shape without the risk of impinging primers in the magazine tube. And they produce this for 4570, 357 Magnum, all kinds of different cartridges that are commonly used in tubular magazines. And then Hornady made the claim that it was now a 300-yard cartridge, which throws in the face of what is generally considered to be the range of a 30-30 Winchester, which is 200 yards. Now, there's a couple of reasons that we generally consider the 30-30 Winchester to be a 200-yard cartridge, and that is, well, the round or flat type nose bullet causing velocity and thereby energy to be shed very rapidly. Generally, the 30-30 Winchester's ballistic trajectory, is considered to be rather rainbow-like, which I can actually go ahead and roll in some charts for this here. This is a comparison between the Hornady lever evolution ammunition as well as Remington core locked in the same loading. And as you can see here, that out to 100 yards and even 200 yards, you don't see that big of a difference. But once you get out to 300 yards, there's a pretty significant drop in the Remington core locked ammunition. Now, if you then also take this to a chart to take a look at the velocities, you'll note that at 200 yards, the core locked ammunition drops off to below the threshold that you want of about 1,000 feet per second for hunting type purposes. And the Hornady round continues on to 300 yards with a good relationship with velocity overall. Now, how about accuracy type aspects? Because I was asked about this by a subscriber not too long ago. What it comes down to, in this case, what I have observed so far in shooting both loadings, I guess I should say, is that I see no difference in accuracy. If you take another look at that chart, you will note that though the lever evolution ammunition isn't dropping as fast as the Remington core locked ammunition, it's still dropping pretty quickly. That's still, I would still consider that a very rainbow trajectory. At 100 and 200 yards, the difference is negligible. At 300 yards, I do think it'll be more easy to make hits with the lever evolution ammunition, but that doesn't necessarily relate over to better accuracy as much as it relates to perhaps ease of shooting, which I guess in this case we're kind of splitting hairs here as to what accuracy is actually derived from, but velocity plays a part. The density of the bullet being able to resist wind drift plays a part, but then also the flat shooting trajectory or point blank range aspect of it is also another part. And in overall concepts, black powder cartridges did not have good point blank range. Smokeless powder cartridges had better point blank range, and you can really see that when you look at rear sights that were designed at the time. Black powder cartridges have very tall adjustments to the rear sights, and because you're much more lobbing when you get to the long range aspects of black powder cartridges. However, smokeless powder cartridges have much less drastic incremental changes made for distance and are also able to shoot out to greater distances. The 30-30 Winchester, however, does not really show this because it wasn't designed with that in mind. And that's the overall reality. Now, especially when you look at the primary uses of a 30-30 Winchester, which is kind of a brush gun, you mostly see people run either very low power optics or iron sights. So you're not necessarily setting yourself up in a scenario to A, wring out all of the accuracy out of that particular cartridge, but B, also be concerned about really tiny groups as much as just being able to put a hit on target, which in the case of hunting at sub 100 yards, is probably the bigger overall concern. Now let's do some real quick cartridge comparison. In 1902, Winchester unveiled the .32 Winchester Special. And the idea behind that cartridge was to give hunters a slightly more powerful version of the .30 Winchester that wasn't as powerful as the .30-06 Springfield. And the idea being that you would have this cartridge, 170 grain bullet, 32 caliber, same overall construction, rimmed cartridge, necked, all that kind of stuff as a .30 Winchester, just a little bit more mass. Now let's go ahead and run a 170 grain load from Remington core locked and the .32 Winchester Special and see how they compare. And as you'll notice, they're pretty much neck and neck. And even if we take a look at velocities and such here, we'll see that though the .32 Special slightly edges out the .30 Winchester, it's not that appreciable. And they're both pretty much 200-yard cartridges. Those are kind of my takeaways from that. Now, where the 30-30 Winchester kind of edges out the 32 Special comes down to ammunition availability. I have seen way more rifles chambered in 30-30, and I've seen way more 30-30 ammunition on the shelves. Now, when ammunition was plentiful and we weren't in the middle of this ammo crisis, you could find 30-30 Winchester all over the place for $17 to $21. I remember looking up 32 Special because I hardly ever see it on shelves, and it was running roughly $22 to $25 at one point, which isn't good, but isn't great either. However, today, 30-30 Winchester is running about $3 a round, and I cannot wait for this to be over and we can go back to normal ammunition prices. As far as performance goes, the cartridges are 6 of one, half a dozen of another between the 30-30 Winchester and the 32 Winchester Special. Like you're really kind of splitting hairs at this point. However, the 30-30 Winchester does have more offerings, and you get more available loads, have a greater opportunity for reloads, and then your velocities are also running from 21 to 2400 feet per second in a lot of your factory type ammunition, whereas 32 Special is pretty much 2200 feet per second in everything that I've seen so far. So just a couple things to consider there. Now, what do I think are good uses for the 30-30 Winchester? Well, the 30-30 Winchester most definitely stands out as a hunting cartridge for the light end of big game. So whitetails and black bears, things along that size frame. However, I do know a fella who used to use a 30-30 Winchester for elk hunting. And there's also a Canadian hunting columnist who has taken a large number of moose with the 30-30 Winchester with a single shot at under 100 yards, which is the same distance that my friend hunts elk at. A lot of it comes down to application, guys, and realizing where your thresholds are at. If you're going to hunt big game, you're going to want to do it close up. In Canada, and Newfoundland specifically, the 30-30 Winchester is legal for hunting big game like moose. However, it is highly discouraged. Now, I think with it being a lightweight cartridge, like it's fitting perfectly into that 100-yard hunting distance to begin with. So if you're hunting heavy brush or something along those lines, 30-30 Winchester is perfect. You get a lightweight, especially if you get a carbine length rifle, a light rifle, light recoiling cartridge, still plenty of wallop when it gets there. It's a great cartridge for close-in hunting. Now, I also think it would be really great in a place like Alaska or any other place where you're concerned about bears if you wanted a lightweight rifle type option so that you could travel with other things. Like say you're going to go fishing in Alaska and you don't want some grizzly showing up wanting you and your fish for a snack. You could use a 30-30 Winchester at those relatively close ranges and have a reasonable expectation that it would put a grizzly down. Now, for home defense, I don't necessarily think the 30-30 Winchester is the best choice. That's a lot of cartridge, and a lot of it depends on the home. So I live in a suburban neighborhood. I don't particularly want to kill the bad guy who broke into my house trying to hurt me and the neighbor. So I don't necessarily consider it a good option for home defense. But if you lived in a more rural area, I think it would be fantastic for that. It would be great for eliminating varmints. It would be fantastic to be able to just, lightweight rifle to toss into, your farm truck or something like that as you piddle about the fields doing whatever it is you need to do. In that instance, the 30-30 cartridge makes a lot of sense. I like it. I'm in. I'm totally picking up what you're laying down. I myself would be interested to see what a 30-30 Winchester would do with actual Spitzer type ammunition as far as like accuracy and point blank range and all that kind of stuff. But at this point, I don't foresee myself getting into hand loading for that purpose as much as trying to be a little more cost efficient in my ammunition consumption overall. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on 30-30 Winchester. I hope you guys found this thought-provoking, and have a good day.